This message is a heavenly interruption and urgent word for those who have always felt different. There is something about you that disturbs the world, a sacred abnormality that people cannot stop attempting to break. They thought they had you figured out, neatly packed in a box labeled quiet, overlooked, or finished. Then they realize you've taken a quantum leap so mind-blowing that they're blinking like glitching robots, attempting to digest a reality that contradicts their logic. This is more than simply a sensation, it's a spiritual phenomena. And if you're seeing this, it means your life has officially become a private investigation for the kingdom of evil and its earthly agents. Your name is often mentioned in group talks. The phony pals who smile that you are now following your every step like undercover spies, looking for flaws in your testimony. Even your most ardent foes are discreetly scrolling through your life, as if they missed an important chapter in a major series. Why? Because what you've just accomplished, how you've risen from the ashes they left you in, violates everything they thought they understood about power, success, and the rules of the world. You did not obey their guidelines. You did not beg for their approval. You did not collapse beneath their strain. You didn't even bother explaining yourself. You just arrived at the finish line, wearing a crown of glory that they promised you would never, ever touch. They are losing their minds, not only because you won, but because you won in a manner that reveals the futility of their own existence. They desire to know your secret, yet they lack the fortitude to bear the weight of your anointing. They assumed you were simply the quiet, innocuous one, the one they could easily dismiss. They are now spiraling, whispering, and desperately trying to understand. How did they pull this off without clout, connections, a sugar daddy, or playing the dirty games we all play? Buckle up, chosen one, because this message is the divine debriefing you have been waiting for. We're delving into the spiritual mechanics of your ascension, the 14 holy secrets that explain why they're studying you, what you accomplished that they'll never be able to reproduce, and why your mere presence is making even your most arrogant detractors reconsider their whole identity. You didn't simply win a battle. You rebuilt the whole playbook for spiritual warfare. And now they're striving to decipher a glory they were previously too arrogant and blind to acknowledge. Let we begin. 1. Your victory contradicts their blueprint for survival. They are examining you like an unsolvable problem because your achievement makes no sense to them. This isn't because they think you were fortunate or that you have all the necessary resources. It's because, according to their global pattern for survival and success, you weren't even playing. You were not at the networking gatherings, feigning smiles and exchanging meaningless pleasantries. You weren't constantly posting your every action on social media, looking for approval. You were not attempting to impress, flatter, or earn their favor in any manner. You were quiet. You remained motionless. Nonetheless, you emerged victorious. This is what is causing them to suffer spiritually and mentally. These folks, your watchers, believed they knew how the world operated. They had a formula, a blueprint given to them by the spirit of the age. Manipulate a little here, tread on a few people there, wear the correct mask for the right occasion, and make sure everything appears beautiful on the surface, even if the inside is rotting with insecurity, bitterness, and compromise. But you, anointed one, accomplished none of this. You rejected their plan. You remained silent while they were noisy. When others dispersed, you remained grounded. You remained genuine while they performed. And now you've turned up in places they said you'd never be permitted to enter, accomplishing things they never imagined you could do, and exuding a tranquility they've never felt. That explains why they are fascinated. You disrupted their mental algorithm. You were predicted to fail based on their estimates. You were meant to remain little, silent, and defeated. And since they never paid attention to your essence, to the God who works inside you, they can't figure out which critical variable they overlooked. They are now re-watching scenes from your life like detectives on a cold case, whispering, "How did they pull that off? When did that shift happen? Who is secretly helping them?" They are dissecting your every move in slow motion because your genuine success has exposed the fundamental lie of their own frantic efforts. The reality is, they are not actually upset with what you have accomplished. They're upset because you didn't have to sell your soul to acquire it. You didn't have to take on another identity. You did not need to share every breath you took to demonstrate your value. You've just become. And it is a terrible thought for those who have spent their whole life focused on performance rather than purpose. What they will never understand is that while they were compulsively focused on optics, you were focused on obedience. Obedience to your development, healing, and God's greater purpose. You were creating in the stillness, in the hidden spaces, and in the sorrow. But now that your work is public, they are scrambling, not because they actually despise you, but because your success is forcing them to face a terrible thought. Maybe I did it all wrong. And the reality is, you didn't pull it off because you were fortunate. You pulled it off because you never played their crooked and heartless game in the first place. 2. You let pain educate you, and they let it embitter them. This is the big dividing line. Most individuals allow the crushing weight of suffering shatter them. You, however, allowed it to shape you. That is the deep difference. That is the mystical alchemy they are attempting to comprehend, but finding difficult to grasp. They, too, had to deal with unpleasant situations. They faced grief, betrayal, disappointments, and disillusionment. Instead of learning from the fire, they allowed it to harden them, making them cynical and cold. They became bitter. You became better. They constructed walls. You built wisdom. And now they're gazing at you, wondering how on earth you're still standing, smiling, shining, and winning, while they're stuck in the same poisonous emotional cycle from 5 years ago, reliving past wounds like broken records. You did not achieve this magnificent metamorphosis because you had less challenges. You probably had more. There is no expression for the type of suffering you went through. The treachery you endured might and should have turned your heart to stone. But you didn't allow it. You made a deliberate, everyday decision to allow your sorrow to open your eyes rather than shut your heart. While others became cynical, cautious, and distrustful of everyone, you grew closer to God. You bravely confronted your inner darkness. You sat with the excruciating questions. You had inside surgery, something most people are too afraid to contemplate. What they don't comprehend is that your breakthrough did not occur in a single day. It was neither a single prayer or a stroke of luck. It was the tedious, torturous daily struggle of refusing to let your sorrow to define you. While others drank the poison of anger, held grudges, and plotted retribution, you swallowed the harsh medicine of truth, even if it burnt your throat on the way down. This is how you developed. That is how you transitioned from a condition of sheer survival to one of great insight. That is how you magically transformed your deepest wounds into wells of knowledge, while others continued to pick at their scars, unwilling to let them heal. They see the wonderful fruits of your life today, but they have no idea how difficult the journey was. They are cheering for your brightness, unaware that it was formed in the core of the fire. They are jealous of your tranquility, but they are unaware of the battles you had to fight in your own head to get it. And now they see you prospering, serene, and full of light, which confuses and angers them since they know what you've been through. They were present. Some of them were even responsible for it. They just didn't expect you to learn from it. They anticipated it to wreck you in the same manner that it did them. You didn't make your sorrow an excuse to fail. You treated it as a magnificent classroom. You posed difficult questions. You accomplished the deep, invisible effort. Every day, you made the decision not to let your past define you. That level of emotional and spiritual intelligence cannot be taught in a book or in a conference. It is won in the dark, behind closed doors, and in the holy solitude of your Gethsemane. And now they want the result, but they are completely reluctant to go through the internal effort that produced it. That's why they're puzzled. That is why they treat you like a puzzle they will never solve. 3. You operated silently, not to be mysterious, but in obedience to divine timing. You were not silent because you were weak or had nothing to say. You weren't low-key because you lacked drive. And you were not lurking in the background because you had nothing going for you. You remained mute while God processed you. The Almighty's hand was doing something deep and surgical inside of you. And whenever you attempted to express this profound inner work to others, they couldn't understand it. Their eyes would glaze over. They'd provide shallow guidance. So you ultimately quit trying. You learned an important lesson. Certain things should not be announced while they are still in the process of being. You realized that a seed must be concealed in the earth's darkness in order to germinate. Exposing it to light too soon would kill it. People mistook your silence for failure. They whispered that you had given up, that you had lost your passion, and that you had nothing more to contribute. But the fact, the magnificent truth, was that you were in a state of heavenly preparation. You were in God's cocoon. You were being cleansed of materialistic distractions, false soul tie attachments, and harmful generational patterns. You were being transformed into someone so new and strong that you would become unrecognizable, even to your former self. You were not hiding, you were mending. You weren't lost, you were being redirected by the Master Navigator. And now that you've appeared, they're completely perplexed because they didn't witness any of the work that was going on beneath. They were always noisy, continuously posting, chatting, and acting for an uninterested audience. You, on the other hand, remained calm while listening, learning, and waiting, not because you lacked confidence, but because you had divine clarity. You didn't need the world's approval to see that something great and sacred was growing inside you. And that, anointed one, is what distinguishes you. You weren't attempting to seem successful. You were going through the process of becoming solid. You didn't want transitory glory. You wanted a solid foundation that would last a lifetime. And now that your Kairos has arrived, the world perceives you as having appeared out of nowhere. But, in reality, you were in a hallowed area that others couldn't reach. That type of patience, that kind of unshakable faith in divine timing, perplexes those who are accustomed to the world's shortcuts and rapid satisfaction. It irritates people who measure their success by their visibility, since quiet represents stagnation. But for you, quiet was sacrosanct. It was a strategy. It represented your submission to a higher force. They are now repeating every conversation and recollection, wondering how they missed it, how they grossly undervalued you, and how you arrived fully grown, radiating knowledge, power, tranquility, and presence, as if you had bypassed all the hard stages. But you didn't miss anything. You just did not share your precious process with anyone who were not called by God to see it. They believed you were insignificant, but you were actually aligned. And now that it is your time to shine, everything you created in secret is resonating so loudly in the spirit world that they cannot ignore it, no matter how hard they try. Let us pause for a bit before delving further into the mysteries of your anointing. If this message is a confirmation to your spirit, a heavenly indication that you are on the correct track, I would want you to perform two things. First, confirm your agreement with this message by subscribing to God Connection and turning on all alerts. This is your spiritual home, and we want to ensure that you never miss out on the manna God has prepared for you. Second, if you are blessed by our ministry and feel compelled to help the Lord's work, consider spreading a seed of faith. There is a super thanks button just below this video. A $10 gift is a significant act of cooperation, a declaration of trust that allows us to place these keys of the kingdom in the hands of more chosen ones throughout the globe who are feeling lost and bewildered. Your help makes all the difference. Now let's return to the revelation. 4. You did not pull it off. Instead, you endured until it manifested. People see the end result and label it a win. What they don't realize is that your life was not formed by your successes. It was formed by what did not destroy you. You did not pull this off because you had the ideal strategy, a hidden advantage, or a generous benefactor. You persevered. That's the secret. That is the whole tale. You faced betrayals that should have made you wary. You went through the uncertainty that should have made you stop. You survived the seclusion that should have turned you resentful. You withstood God's silence, which pushed your faith to the maximum. You faced uncertainty from others and, more crucially, from yourself. You faced rejection and grief. You continued coming up to a life that was constantly knocking you down, not because you were always strong, but because you refused to let your agony be the end of your tale. They want to celebrate your achievement as if it occurred overnight. However, they were not there throughout the long, excruciating evenings that flowed into each other, leaving your pillow wet in tears. They didn't see the version of you that had to keep convincing yourself not to quit. waging conflicts in your head that no one else could see. They didn't feel the crushing weight of your disappointment while you were expected to come up, smile, and go on as if everything was great. You went through a quiet horror. That is what created the present version of you. There is no magic, no luck, no brilliant strategic maneuver. It was unadulterated, gritty spiritual perseverance. People often ask, "How did you do it?" because they badly want to think there is a shortcut. They aim to replicate the blueprint, hoping to get the same effects without the scars. However, trial and error shaped your route. It cannot be taught or recreated. Your strength sprang from surviving what would have devastated most individuals. Your radiance comes from crawling out of holes where you were never intended to survive. And, to be really honest, the true miracle isn't what you've constructed on the exterior. It is the fact that you are still alive, sane, and with a gentle heart. You didn't always think this would happen. There were times when you were surviving on spiritual fumes, with your faith the size of a mustard seed. There were moments when every fiber of your being urged you to quit up. But a little, holy glimmer of trust, a whisper from the Holy Spirit, kept you going for just one more day, and then another. That's what they don't comprehend. That is the portion of your narrative they cannot bear. You did not have one huge break. You went through a series of major setbacks, yet you always came back stronger and wiser. They believe you pulled it off as if it were a flawless, polished, deliberate move. But it was not polished. It was dirty, bloody, and raw. The triumph is more than simply what you've earned. It is in the fact that you did not lose yourself while attempting to make it through. That is the true tale. That's the part they'll never grasp. 5. Your access resulted from alignment, not approval. You formerly believed that in order to advance in life, you needed to win over others. You attempted to be pleasant. You humbly entered rooms that did not merit your presence. You acted little so that others wouldn't be intimidated by your brilliance. You bowed over backwards, forwards, and sides for folks who were unable to sit erect in their own character. But you became fatigued somewhere along the way on that terrible voyage. A heavenly tiredness settled in. You were weary of asking for approval from spiritually bankrupt individuals. You were weary of conveying your feelings to individuals who had already chosen not to listen. You were weary of transforming yourself into a palatable, non-threatening version of yourself in order to be acceptable. That is when the huge transformation occurred. You stopped seeking their approval. You let go. And something remarkable happened. The correct doors, the God-ordained ones, started swinging open on their own. Not because you coerced them, but because your spiritual vibration shifted from drawing users to attracting alignment. You no longer needed to be picked by individuals who had never seen you clearly before. And by letting go of that frantic, clawing desire for human approval, you tapped into something far deeper and more powerful: divine alignment. That is what people can't figure out. You don't move like someone attempting to impress. You move as if you've already received approval from a higher authority. That type of confidence, quiet, grounded, and sacred, deeply disturbs individuals who rely on outward attention to feel significant. Because, while they were performing for the audience, you were connecting with God at a higher frequency. And in that hallowed area, you ceased being pleasant to the world and became a threat to the reign of evil. People are perplexed about how quickly things changed for you, but it wasn't chance. It was released. When you stopped attempting to fit into broken institutions, broken relationships, and damaged family narratives, the divine flow flooded into your existence. You were not punished earlier. You were only delayed by your own attachments. When you broke free from that loop and proclaimed, "Enough is enough," everything changed. The room you couldn't go into previously, you didn't need it anymore. God provided a better alternative. Who rejected you? They were replaced with those who admired and appreciated you. And, in a lovely irony, you were considerably more fascinating when you stopped seeking attention. Because alignment lights differently. It isn't loud, but it's felt. It's not spectacular, but it's obviously effective. That's why they're puzzled. They're still auditioning for parts in a play that's about to conclude. You've already signed the heavenly contract for your mission. They want to be accepted. You are becoming more authoritative. That's the difference. That is why they don't understand how you achieved it. Because your advancement was not man-made. It was divine. 6. You mastered the unseen game of spiritual laws, which they laughed at. They openly mocked your religion, describing it as silly, wishful thinking, and a crutch for the weak. While they were busy calculating, plotting, and faking their way into rooms, you were quietly aligning with something much deeper and more powerful than the physical realm. The spiritual principles of God's kingdom. They believed you were naive, too quiet, patient, and too trusting. But what their haughty eyes failed to see was that while they were perfecting the technique of manipulation, you were understanding the universal rules of the Spirit. You were studying how the invisible world influences everything we perceive in the natural. You studied energy and spiritual frequency, while they studied control and compulsion. You discovered that your desire has weight, that the spiritual frequency in which you work impacts what and who you attract, and that your devotion to God, even when it makes no logical sense, places you in a position to receive miracles that others can never produce with all their effort. You recognize that God's time is not always on your schedule, but it is always divine and flawless. That is the game they had no idea you were playing. They felt that power was defined by how loud you are, how connected you seem, and how much you can flaunt your material things. You discovered that genuine, enduring power is based on your connection with God, spiritual authority, purpose, and integrity. You moved with a profound, inner awareness, while others moved with a loud, external noise. And now they are trapped in repeating, painful cycles because they have only ever learned how to perform. In contrast, you had an inward transformation. They don't comprehend how you maintained growing without selling your soul, or how you kept shining without participating in their poisonous gossip networks. They saw you praying while they were conspiring. They watched you focusing on God's word while they mocked your faith. They observed you relaxing on the Sabbath as they were about to burn out. And yet, here you are, winning in ways that others cannot match. Not because you are brighter, wealthier, or more connected in the worldly sense, but because you are in a divine flow with power that others cannot match. They mastered shortcuts. You've mastered surrender. They studied optics. You studied obedience. And now they are perplexed because the spiritual principles you followed were immovable, and spiritual laws will always trump human manipulation, even if it takes longer to manifest their outcomes. You did not play the game to win over others. You played it to get God's approval. And you did. That is why they are deeply affected. Because they are now discovering that what they previously regarded as soft was truly holy power. What they derided as insane was in fact heavenly discipline. And what they scoffed at in you is now something they secretly and desperately want to comprehend, but can't. Because it is not just knowledge, it is revelation. And disclosure cannot be faked. 7. They are panicking because your life has just shown how fake theirs is. Let us be absolutely clear. They are not alarmed because you harmed them or did anything to them. They are terrified because your life, by just being honest, has become a mirror that they have desperately avoided for years. You didn't need to call them out. You did not need to reveal their falsehoods. You did not have to drag them in public. However, your genuine, unadulterated sincerity speaks louder than any speech, shade, or clapback you could ever give. You are live, breathing evidence that it is possible to ascend without manipulating, achieve without selling out, and heal without pretending to be flawless. And that fact jeopardizes the fundamental basis of the image they have constructed their lives upon. They spent years creating an image of themselves that seems prosperous and cheerful on the surface, but is hollow and wretched on the inside. Every decision they took was purposeful. Every relationship they formed was transactional. Each social media post was a performance. They formed their lives on being seen rather than being full. Then you showed up. Flawed, honest, often chaotic, evolving in public, yet still winning. That is what is ruining their brains. You didn't defeat them in their own game. You demonstrated that the game itself is a forgery, a useless delusion. They are now trapped, since accepting your accomplishment as real requires them to recognize that they have been living a lie. It means they must rethink the carefully constructed personalities they created, the people they harmed to advance, and the truth they abandoned long ago in order to look strong. Your delight, devoid of bitterness, devastates them. Your peaceful assurance, free of ego, reveals their genuine uneasiness. Your achievement without having to stomp on other people embarrasses them because it demonstrates how completely needless their harshness and backstabbing were. They are very uncomfortable because your life is a testimonial that says, you didn't have to be phony to succeed. You chose to be. There is no defense against that type of living truth. So they panic. They begin to belittle your successes. They tell people that you were merely fortunate or that someone helped you. They suddenly identify weaknesses in what you are doing and attempt to undermine your testimony. But the reality is, their world is collapsing. Their meticulously manicured image no longer inspires awe. It resembles a cheap outfit. What you're feeling from them is more than simply adulation. It's a mute, impotent hatred disguised as interest. They want to dislike you, but deep down, they really want what you have. Unearned tranquility, unforced confidence, and success without a disguise. And they are understanding, much too late, that the only thing standing between them and genuine happiness is themselves. You did not just climb, you disclosed. And now they are revealed in the light of your genuineness. 8. You did not outperform them. You outlasted their weapons. You did not advance in this life because you were quicker, louder, or more connected than others. You succeeded because you overcame obstacles that would have caused most individuals to fold, collapse, or quit. They came after you with all they had: gossip, rejection, setups, quiet sabotage, and spiritual assaults. You were expected to collapse under the overwhelming strain. But you didn't. That is what haunts them right now. Not only did you climb, but you did so against their aggressive and determined efforts to keep you down. They didn't expect you to come back. In fact, they expected your quiet to be permanent. They saw the treachery unfold. Some of them even took part in it, directly or indirectly. They grinned in your face while planning your downfall behind your back. They were certain that the humiliation, financial losses, and utter loneliness would drain you completely. They believed that if they could only make your life difficult for long enough, you would gently fade into oblivion. However, you did not vanish. You developed. They failed to see that you were not motivated by your ego. You were motivated by a heavenly purpose. You were not just attempting to prosper in the world. You were called by God to become someone new. That type of drive does not fade when things become tough. It ignites. And while they were flinging stones at you, you were silently learning how to build a foundation alongside them. While others laughed at your difficulties, you were developing spiritual fangs. While they tried to obstruct your way, God was teaching you how to go through fire barefoot, if necessary. You did not need to outperform them at their own game. You just outlasted their weaponry. You faced silent conflicts, fierce spiritual warfare, gaslighting, smear campaigns, and soul-crushing emotional weariness. Instead of diminishing, you solidified. That's why they're spinning. Because you grew out of every trap they laid. You absorbed every assault they made at you and enabled God to use it as fuel. And now they are dealing with the harsh consequences of their own evil actions, while you shine in spite of everything. They can't accept it because, in their perspective, cruelty is a kind of power. In your world, however, perseverance is a heavenly coin. And you are affluent in ways they cannot quantify, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. You're still here. That fact alone is a heavenly setback that they did not expect. You did not win by being fancy. You won by surviving all they and their demonic puppet masters promised would kill you for good. That is something they can't get past. That is something they can never reproduce. And that is why they are still watching you, perplexed, outraged, and secretly impressed. 9. You have escaped the algorithm of normality, and this makes you unpredictable. You do not move as they expect you to, which is why they can't figure you out. You've effectively escaped the emotional algorithm that most people are hopelessly stuck in. You don't go after folks who ignore you. You don't respond every time someone throws shade at you. You don't send out ambiguous, passive-aggressive signals only to get attention. You don't strive to show your value to folks who have already made the serious error of doubting you. That is why you feel like a bug in their system. They are used to others engaging in a predictable game of emotional chess. You do not even sit at that table anymore. The majority of individuals follow a predictable pattern. Say anything to set them off, and they will reply just as you predicted. Withdraw a bit of your attention, and they will go to extreme lengths to regain it. Give them a crumb of acceptance, and they'll seek your validation like a narcotic. But you don't need their approval. You have formed your identity in Christ, not without it. You don't respond based on your emotions, you watch with your soul. You don't retaliate, you soar. That makes you entirely incomprehensible to folks who use deception as their major technique for navigating the world. You're not addicted to attention. You are not controlled by your anxieties. You don't publish your misery for public pity or show off your delight for praise. You've learned, through costly trial and error, how to be present with your emotions without being chained. That is really unusual in our world. And for those who only see connection through the prism of control, you are very aggravating since you cannot be manipulated like the others. They assumed they could research you in the same way they had studied everyone else, running the same emotional scripts on you, and getting the same predicted results. But you broke the code. You are not looking for closure from people who have wounded you. You're not waiting for an apology that will most likely never arrive. You don't need vengeance to be at peace. You've entered a version of yourself that isn't controlled by a spirit of scarcity, which is terrible for individuals who only know how to function via emotional leverage. They want to know what makes you tick, but the fact is that you've progressed beyond survival mode. You are no longer reacting from your hurts, but from your knowledge. That makes you unpredictable, not because you are erratic, but because you are free. You do not flinch when tested. When you are misunderstood, you do not get too concerned. You move with an inner peace, which cannot be influenced. They cannot track you down. They can't bait you. And they certainly cannot break you. You evaded their algorithm by prioritizing your recovery above their games. And now they're stranded, attempting to interpret a soul that no longer follows their perverted laws. 10. You succeeded because you let go of whatever was killing you, even if it had your last name. You did not only achieve, you fled. And you didn't get out of any evident external trap. You escaped the emotional prisons that most people never leave, because those prisons are deceptively dressed up as tradition, family, and loyalty. You let go of things, people, and mindsets that were poisoning your spirit, even if they were disguised as love, obligation, or your own DNA. That is what made your climb so unique. That is what has everybody staring at you in such bewilderment right now. You pulled it off because you had the raw, holy bravery to reject what everyone else around you still worships. You prioritized advancement above comfort. And you did not pick the aesthetically pleasing growth that is appreciated on social media. You chose the type of growth that isolates you, gets you talked about, and makes people who are stuck in their own dysfunction say, "Who do you think you are?" You became the person in your lineage who said, "This generational dysfunction stops with me." You said no to toxic cycles passed down like family heirlooms. You maintain a healthy, holy barrier between yourself and those you love, not out of spite, but out of sheer spiritual survival. That requires the type of internal, God-given power that most people never acquire because they are too afraid to be the first to end the cycle of pain. You were prepared to bear the enormous burden of being misunderstood by your own family. You were willing to put up with the guilt trips, emotional blackmail, and deep disorientation that came with leaving the people and places you formerly called home. And for what? For peace. For your sanity. For your future. For something deeper than tradition. You did it for the truth. That is the kind of choice that does not seem bold from the outside. In reality, it often seems selfish or rebellious to those who profit from the previous system. But it's innovative on the inside. Most individuals are still hopelessly entangled in destructive family dynamics, clinging to relationships solely because they have known the person for years and being loyal to their own misery because it is familiar. But you breached the horrible pact. You said, "Just because we share blood doesn't mean you get to bleed me dry." You prioritized your soul above their stories. That's what altered everything. And now they don't comprehend how you did it, how you became free, and how you began winning. But it's because you gave up what they still hold to. You give up the illusion of belonging in a poisonous system in order to create something genuine and wholesome. You established a new standard, lineage, and bloodline for your future generations, one that starts with healing rather than violence. That is not a lesson most families teach their children, but you figured it out. And this is why you are no longer confined. You have been changed. 11. You succeeded because you were willing to be the villain in their story and the hero in God's. You accepted what most people spend their whole life avoiding. You allowed them to perceive you as the villain. You stopped spending your valuable breath defending your character to individuals who were determined to misunderstand you. You recognized that in their tale, you would always be the one who changed, walked away, stopped calling, acted different, and established limits that their dominating spirits refused to accept. And you did not flinch. You let them recount whatever skewed version of events made them feel better about their own decisions. And you continued on your mission anyway. That's what gave you the heavenly edge. You did not let your ego to keep you locked in conditions that were draining your soul. You realized that you didn't need to be liked. You just wanted to be free. And choosing independence comes with a cost in terms of people, places, and acceptance. But it brought you into wonderful harmony with God. You sacrificed their comfort zone for your calling, which is a spiritual transaction they cannot understand. They assumed your quiet indicated guilt, but it was really heavenly discipline. They assumed your remoteness indicated arrogance, but it was really divine clarity. While they were talking, emphasizing your shortcomings, and attempting to unite people against you, you were in the wilderness with God, being purified. You were shedding old layers, dying to the old version of yourself, and traveling through unseen conflicts. And you didn't write about it. You did not explain it. You've just grown. That is why people are startled right now, because, in their sight, you vanished. However, you were really being molded by God. You were not hiding. Rather, you were becoming. And now that the outcomes of your private procedure have spoken for themselves, they don't know how to react. They spent so much time and energy slandering your reputation that they were unprepared to see your success. They expected you to come back and quarrel. They wanted a fight, a response, and an emotional collapse. But you chose elevation above revenge. You didn't strive to change their incorrect version of your tale. You just outlasted it via your accomplishment. And this is why you're winning. Because you weren't attempting to prove your identity to them. You were demonstrating who you were to God. And hell has never prepared them to halt that objective. You knew something they never did. Being misunderstood by others is fleeting, while being faithful to your God-given destiny has everlasting consequences. And now, while they are still rehearsing the past, you have completely entered your future, not as their villain, but as the indisputable hero of your own redemption story, scripted by God Himself. 12. You made peace with starting again, which made you unstoppable. You did not get ahead just because of what you got. You advanced because you were willing to let go of some things. That is what people cannot comprehend. They are not just stunned by your accomplishment. They are plagued by the idea that you were ready to destroy bridges that they are still afraid to cross. You did not simply start afresh. You let whole versions of yourself to die without making a big deal about it. You silently let the previous identities, relationships, aspirations, and narratives to crumble while the world assumed you were just lost or figuring things out. Most individuals are frightened of starting anew because they associate it with failure. However, you have made beginning over your superpower. You viewed it for what it really is, a fresh start from God, not a setback. You did not hold on to a harmful past merely to pretend you had won. You did not keep individuals just because of the amount of years you spent. You had the divine courage to walk away from virtually everything you ever wished for, because you recognized that if it costs you your peace, it is too costly, even if it comes in the form of loyalty, love, or shared memories. What makes you unstoppable is that you are no longer dependent on comfort. You've experienced enough loss and sadness to understand that endings are often simply veiled invitations from God to a deeper alignment. You are not seeking stability in a transient world. You are seeking truth. And if that means restarting 100 times, so be it. Every time you stripped yourself down to nothing, you came back sharper, lighter, stronger, and more focused. People watched from afar, expecting to see you disintegrate with each defeat. However, each fall exposed an additional layer of your resistance that they were unaware of. They can't digest it because they're still dealing with their fear, clinging to people who drain them, and stuck in a version of life that seems nice on the surface but is empty and dead on the inside. And when they see you fearlessly prospering in a life that is nothing like the one you began with, it perplexes them because they know, deep down in their fearful hearts, that they would never have had the bravery to start over like you. You learned the ancient art of release, and through that mastery, you found something that most people will never experience: genuine freedom. That's what made you unstoppable. Not the victories or the plaudits, but the quiet, strong choice to walk away from anything that no longer fit with your soul, even if it meant starting again. 13. You beat their system because you weren't playing their game, but rather building a kingdom. You were not in the race they assumed you were in. While others were busy competing with one another, comparing their accomplishments, and following the latest trends, you were silently constructing something they couldn't see. You were creating a life based not on outward attention or appreciation, but on something sacred: substance and character. They pursued statistics, image, trends, and clout. You pursued healing, development, integrity, and spiritual harmony. And now, the same system they revered has turned against them. While you have created something so genuine, so entrenched in God's truth, that it cannot be shaken. They followed the script. They performed their role. They said the correct things. They crafted an image to seem successful, even if it was all a ruse. You didn't simply rip up their screenplay. You created a completely new novel with God as a co-author. They don't comprehend how you achieved it since you didn't utilize the same corrupt elements. You weren't trying to be popular. You were striving to become entire. You weren't crafting a persona. You were recuperating from the past. You weren't attempting to impress people on the internet. You were trying to live honestly in front of one person, God. And in doing so, you discovered a freedom that others cannot mimic. The fact is that you were never interested in playing their game because you understood, via the Spirit of God, that it was corrupt. You witnessed how many individuals achieved success but lacked tranquility, following but no direction, platforms but no spirit. Instead of attempting to win that empty game, you just chose out. You weren't being lazy. You were thinking about something deeper. You were creating a life that would not crumble the moment the spotlight was turned off. They found themselves trapped in continuous cycles of pursuing significance, defending their falsehoods, and maintaining their brittle masks. But you were developing something everlasting, based on heavenly purpose rather than human achievement. Now they look up and see you growing, and they can't figure out why their old techniques aren't working anymore. Because the system on which they built their lives is crumbling under its own weight, while you are unaffected by its destruction. You're not competing for crumbs of attention any longer. You are sitting at a table that God has prepared for you. You created your own kingdom, not because you wanted to dominate over others, but because you finally learned how to control yourself. You did not defeat them at their own game. You outgrown it. And now they're tired of pursuing illusions while you live in a reality that was never supposed to be a game in the first place. 14. They are studying your strategy, but what you have cannot be copied since it was forged in sacred fire. They are analyzing every movement you make as if it were a formula they could duplicate. They are observing your material, emulating your gestures, and attempting to replicate your rhythms as if what you have can be downloaded, practiced, or reverse engineered. But what they essentially fail to comprehend is that your essence was not derived from a training, but from consecration. This wasn't a plan, it was about survival. This wasn't branding, it was a terrible transformation. You did not perfect a method. Rather, you underwent a heavenly change that burned away everything wrong inside you, leaving just God's truth. They crave your shine, but can't manage your fire. They are fascinated by the outcomes of your life, but they would crumble under the enormous weight of your method. Because what you carry did not originate in a think tank or a marketing conference. It was made in the anguish of your darkest hours, honed by the ache of betrayal, and immersed in the rivers of solitude. You did not learn this in class. You learn it via the furnace of hardship. That's why when people attempt to emulate you, it seems empty and doesn't have the same impact since your genuineness carries weight. It's not simply what you do, it's who you've got to become to achieve it. This realization did not come to you out of nowhere. You fought with angels for it. You had to give up things you cared about. You went through doors you never wanted to go through and confronted titans you never expected to encounter in order to connect with your divine purpose. Your knowledge is infused with the recollection of your injuries, and your grace came at a terrible cost. So, if people attempt to examine your output without first comprehending your genesis, they will miss the whole pattern. Because the actual secret is not what you do, but what you carry. And what you carry cannot be reproduced. They cannot read your spiritual frequency, since it was tuned in a dimension they have never experienced. You did not go viral. You went vertical. You were broken open in secret so that what comes through you in public has a purity that cannot be faked. And now that the fruits of your labor are indisputably delicious, people are eager to chart your strategy. However, there is no way. There is just one mantle. Mantles are not taught. They are allocated by God. Allow them to study all they want. Allow them to replicate your style, tempo, and substance. But you must realize that fire does not pass via imitation. It goes through refining. And until they are prepared to go through what you did, they will never carry what you do. Because holy oil is not cheap, and your life was an olive press. They may study you, imitate you, speak about you, and obsess over you, but they will never be you. Because who you've become is not the result of strategy, trends, or convenience. It is the holy consequence of a never-ending internal conflict, individual obedience to God, and choosing alignment over plaudits every time. You didn't simply pull it off. You survived something that should have killed you. You survived strikes that were intended to destroy your very soul. Most importantly, you remained true to your calling despite the world's pressure to comply. They're grieving behind closed doors, not only because you won, but because you did it without playing their nasty game. You did not breach the rules. Rather, you disrupted generational habits. You weren't attempting to seem tough. You grew strong via a holy fire. And now, everything they thought they could manage, delay, or control has reversed in your favor because they didn't expect your God-given anointing to outlast all of their weapons. You are more than simply a riddle that they can't solve. You were never designed to be understood by the crowd. You were sculpted by God, honed in hardship, and chosen for a mission that does not fit their template. So let them continue speculating. Allow them to keep chatting. Allow them to strive to replicate something they will never carry. Because the fact is simple, you did not win by acting like them. You triumphed by refusing to cease being yourself. And it is something they will never be able to recreate. Don't shrink now that you know what you're carrying. Don't explain. Simply keep shining. The true ones will sense it. And the rest? They will only keep wondering how you did it. If this message touched you deeply, made you feel seen, understood, or just reinforced what you already knew in your soul, don't keep it to yourself. Hit the subscribe button right now to ensure you never miss another discovery like this. Like this video if it resonated with your journey, process, or purpose. Please leave a comment and let us know what resonated with you most. We read each one. Most importantly, share this with someone you know who is on a similar path, someone who is being watched, questioned, and doubted yet continues to rise nonetheless. This isn't just a video, it's confirmation. And if you're here, it must have reached you just in time. Welcome home, chosen one. We rise together. God bless you.